In the realm of Persia, during the reign of King Ahasuerus, there lived a Jewish maiden named Hadassah, who was also called Esther. She was an orphan, raised by her older cousin Mordecai, a Benjamite who had been exiled from Jerusalem, along with other captives, during the reign of King Jeconiah, the king of Judah. Mordecai held a prominent position in the king's palace, serving as a gatekeeper. King Ahasuerus, in his riches, decided to display the grandeur of his kingdom and his riches. He held a lavish banquet for all his nobles and servants, lasting for 180 days. Following this, he hosted another banquet, exclusive to the women of the palace, for 7 days. Queen Vashti, the first wife of King Ahasuerus, who occupied a position of great honor and influence in the Persian Empire, was summoned to appear before the king and his guests to flaunt her beauty, but she refused. This angered the king, and he sought counsel from his wise men on how to deal with the queen's disobedience. It was decided that Vashti should be deposed as queen. To find a new queen, a search was initiated throughout the kingdom for beautiful young virgins. A royal beauty contest was to be conducted to choose the new queen. The beauty contest for the new queen was a spectacle of unparalleled grandeur. Young women from every corner of the kingdom were brought to Shushan the palace, where they underwent a year of beautification rituals. Esther was selected among the young women and brought to the king's palace. Esther, with her gentle spirit and remarkable beauty, captured the heart of Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the women's quarters. She found favor in his eyes and received special treatment. When the time came for Esther to be presented to the king, she requested nothing beyond what Haggai, the king's eunuch, had prescribed. And she won the favor of all who saw her. When she stood before the king, she captivated the king with her beauty and grace, and he chose her to be his queen in place of Vashti. The king made a great feast for all his princes and servants, celebrating Esther's coronation. In those days, when the king commanded, it was done throughout the whole kingdom. Mordecai, Esther's cousin and guardian, who was a Jew, sat at the king's gate, performing his duties. One day, 2 of the king's officials, Bigthan and Teresh, of the king's doorkeepers, who kept guard at the doorway, became furious and sought to lay hands on the king. But the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, who in turn told the king in Mordecai's name. And when the matter was investigated, it was found to be true. The plotters were apprehended and executed, and it was recorded in the royal chronicles. Later, the king appointed Haman, an Agagite, as prime minister. Haman sought to exalt himself above all the other officials and demanded that everyone bow down to him. Mordecai, refusing to bow to Haman, angered the prime minister. Consumed by hatred, Haman plotted to destroy all the Jews within the Persian Empire as a way of revenge. Haman convinced the king to issue a decree authorizing the annihilation of the Jews. The decree was irrevocable according to the laws of the Persians and Medes. When Mordecai learned of the decree that Haman had secured from the king to annihilate the Jews, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went through the city wailing bitterly. And in every province, where the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Esther, upon hearing of her people's plight, was deeply distressed. She sent garments to Mordecai to replace his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Haqeeqat, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him orders to go to Mordecai to find out what this was and why it was. Haqeeqat went out to Mordecai to the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the decree that had been issued for their annihilation, to show it to Esther and to explain it to her and to urge her to go to the king to plead for her people and to intercede for them. Haqeeqat returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther sent Haqeeqat back to Mordecai, telling him that all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king without being summoned will be put to death according to the law, except the one to whom the king extends his golden scepter. The golden scepter is the only guarantee that the person will live. Esther explained that she had not been called to go into the king for the past 30 days. When Mordecai heard Esther's message, he sent a reply to Esther, saying, "Do not think to yourself that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have come to a royal position for such a time as this." Then Esther sent back a message to Mordecai, telling him to go and gather together all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for her. They should not eat and drink for 3 days, including night and day. She mentioned that her maids and herself would fast likewise. After that, she will go to the king, even though it is against the law. She said, "If I perish, I perish." On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and with great courage risked her life by entering into the inner court of the king's palace unsummoned. This was a grave offense, punishable by death unless the king extended his golden scepter to her. The king was sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance of the hall. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she found favor in his sight, and miraculously, the king extended his scepter to her, sparing her life. So the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even up to half of the kingdom." Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet, and then to a second banquet the following day. After the first banquet, Haman left joyfully and with gladness of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, and that he did not rise or tremble before him, Haman was filled with fury against Mordecai, but he restrained himself. When Haman got home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife. Haman told them of all his glory and the honor the king had given him. He also told them how Queen Esther invited Jessim to come with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and how he was invited for another banquet the next day, along with the king. But he is still unsatisfied so long as he keeps seeing Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. So Haman's wife, Zeresh, and all his friends advised him to set up a gallows of 75 feet in height, and then in the morning, he should tell the king to hang Mordecai on it. Haman was delighted with the suggestion, so he made the gallows. That night the king could not sleep. So, he commanded that the book of records of the Chronicles be brought to him, and they were read before the king. And it was found written in the books that Mordecai had told the king about Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king asked, "What honor and dignity have been given to Mordecai for this?" The king's servants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." Then the king asked, "Who is in the court?" At this time, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest to the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So, the king's servants replied to the king that Haman was standing in the court. And the king said, "Bring him in." So Haman came in. And the king said to him, "What shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor, if not me?" So Haman replied, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed. And let the robe and the horse be put on the man whom the king delights to honor. And let one of the king's most noble princes go on horseback before him and proclaim through the city." So the king instructed Haman to hurry up and take the robe and the horse, just as he had advised, and do so to Mordecai. The king told Haman to ensure he did not omit anything from all that he had said. In obedience, Haman took the robe and the horse, clothed Mordecai, and made him ride through the city squares on the king's horse, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Mordecai came back to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. Haman narrated everything that had happened to him, to his wife and his friends. But they responded to him by saying, "If Mordecai is of Jewish descent, before whom you have begun to fall, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hurriedly brought Haman to the second banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition?" It shall be granted you. And what is your request? It shall be fulfilled, even to half of the kingdom. Then Esther answered and said, If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let my life be given me as a petition, and the lives of my people as a request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold as male or female slaves, I would have held my peace, because the trouble would not be worth disturbing the king. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, Who is it, and where is he, who has dared to do this? Esther replied, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was frightened before the king and the queen. The king rose in anger from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed back to plead with Queen Esther for his life, because he foresaw his doom. Then the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall where the banquet was, and saw that Haman had fallen on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? As the word left the king's mouth, the servants covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs, told the king about the gallows of 50 cubits high, which Haman had prepared for Mordecai. And the king instructed that Haman be hanged on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king gave Esther the house of Haman, and Mordecai came before the king because Esther had told the king about her relationship with Mordecai. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther made Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. Then Esther approached the king again and fell at his feet and wept. She pleaded with the king to avert the evil intent of Haman and the scheme that he had devised against the Jews. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther. So Esther arose and pleaded with the king to issue a decree to reverse the letters written by Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces, as she cannot bear to see the evil that will come to her people. Then King Ahasuerus said to Esther and Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he attempted to lay hands on the Jews to destroy them. Write also for the Jews, as it pleases you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for any writing that is done in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring cannot be revoked. So the king's scribes were called at that time, and letters were written according to Mordecai's orders, to every province according to its scripts, to every people according to their language, and to the Jews according to their scripts and their language. He sent letters in the king's name and sealed them with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback. In these letters the king granted the Jews in every city to gather themselves together and defend their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed people of any nationality or province who might attack them, their wives, and their children, and to take the properties of their enemies, on one day only, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province, to be published for all peoples, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold on his head and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced. So in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many of the people of the land became Jews, because they were scared of the Jews. The Jews, armed with authority, defeated their foes, killing many of them. They struck down all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, killing and destroying them, and did what they pleased to those who hated them. Esther also requested from the king that Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows, and the king commanded it to be done. In commemoration of their deliverance, the Jews established the annual festival of Purim, a day of feasting and rejoicing. The story of Esther is a testament to God's providential care for his people and deliverance from the plots of their enemies. It is a story of courage, faith, and divine intervention. Esther's bravery in approaching the king, Mordecai's unwavering loyalty, and the miraculous deliverance of the Jewish people serve as a powerful reminder of God's sovereignty and his ability to turn tragedy into triumph. The book of Esther, while not explicitly mentioning God, is a profound reflection of His divine hand at work in human history. Its message of hope, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil continues to inspire and encourage believers across generations. I hope you were blessed by this story. Can you tell us what you have learned in the comment section? Please remember to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Always remember that you are loved. Gracias.